The marble floor under my knees felt like winter, even through the thin pads sewn into my uniform. I scrubbed the wine stain in Mr. Cross's study until my wrists burned, lemon cleaner mixing with the sharp bite of old leather and expensive wood. The room watched me back, not with eyes, but with cameras I never saw and silence I could feel. My phone vibrated in my apron pocket, the school number flashing, and I kept moving. Noah needed me, and the house demanded I pretend otherwise today. My name is Maya Brooks, and 2 years ago I was folding towels in a laundry room, calculating groceries against overdue bills, when my manager cut my hours again. Noah's inhaler was rationed like gold. A friend mentioned a cleaning job on the North Shore, live-in, pay, no questions asked. I heard the last part and signed before my pride could argue, and I told myself I was trading comfort for stability, that I could keep my son safe if I kept my head down. I did not expect the man who owned it either. Damian Cross ran his life the way he ran this room, controlled, polished, and quietly armed. His study smelled of cedar, ink, and a cologne so clean it felt like a warning. I had seen him only in passing, a shadow moving through hallways while security shifted with him like a tide. People lowered their voices when his name traveled across the kitchen. They called him a businessman in public and something darker in private. I never asked which version was real. I just cleaned what he touched and tried not to leave prints behind. The stain fought me like it had a will. I worked in circles, listening for footsteps, listening for my phone. The school would try twice, and then call my emergency contact. And my emergency contact was a woman paid barely more than me. That fact lived in my throat like panic. I wanted to step into the hallway and answer, to hear whether Noah was sick or scared. Instead, I counted my breaths and focused on the rug, because in this house, urgency belonged to other people. I was supposed to be invisible, even to myself. I knew he was there before I heard him. The air thickened, as if the room had decided to hold its breath. My shoulders tightened, but my hands kept moving, because stopping would look like fear. The edge of my vision caught his shoes near the desk, black, and I forced my eyes back to the stain. I felt his attention like a hand at the back of my neck, heavy. What did he want from a woman scrubbing floors? Why did it feel like he was waiting for me to turn around and look? He moved beside the desk, unhurried, as if time was his. People said Damian Cross could end an argument with one phone call. I believed it because the estate shifted when he entered. Drivers stayed at the gate. Deliveries arrived sealed. The security team checked corners before he reached a doorway. I had learned to follow that rhythm and keep my name out of it. Then his voice reached me, low and precise, and my body reacted before my pride could. I kept my eyes on the rug and let my thoughts stay distant, safe. I lifted the cloth and saw the red fade to a faint shadow, like a bruise that would not fully heal. I set my supplies down carefully, making every movement measured. If I stood too fast, it would look like fear. I risked one glance up, just enough to confirm he was watching me, not the rug. His eyes were storm gray, steady and unreadable. My phone glowed in my pocket, the school number pressing against my thigh. A question rose in me, and unwanted. How much did Damian Cross already know about Noah Brooks? Footsteps multiplied in the hall, fast and purposeful, and the study door opened without hesitation. The security team flowed in first, suits and earpieces, and Gabe Rourke's gaze went straight to the desk drawers. I stayed kneeling, frozen in the posture of someone who belonged to the floor. One guard moved to the safe built into the wall paneling. Another checked the trash bin beside my bucket. I did not understand until I saw the empty space on the desk where an envelope had been. Their attention snapped to me like a chain pulled tight. My stomach dropped so hard it felt physical. I pictured the chain reaction, a report, handcuffs, Noah waiting at school with no one coming. I started to explain, then swallowed it, because innocence means nothing when you are convenient. Gabe's gaze held me. A guard stepped closer. Then Damian turned from the window. He did not need to raise his voice. His eyes pinned the room and the room changed. Shoulders eased, hands lowered. Suspicion slipped into obedience. Relief hit me, then fear, because he had believed me before I spoke. Why? It felt impossible. Gabe shifted his team away, and the pressure on me eased. They searched the desk, the trash, the safe, everything except my body. The envelope stayed missing, and that fact felt louder than any accusation. Damian's eyes met mine for a heartbeat, final, and like he had already chosen what he believed. Relief rose, then turned bitter. In this house, being spared could be a sentence. I collected my supplies and left without looking back. My hands were steady, but my thoughts were not. Invisibility was over. Tomorrow I would rewrite my rules, sharper than before. By the next morning the rumor had a heartbeat. I heard it in the clatter of trays that went quiet when I entered, in the way a camera dome seemed to tilt toward me, in the way even the air felt monitored. The envelope from Mr. Cross's desk was still missing, and that absence followed me like a shadow. No one called me a thief. They didn't have to. In this house, silence did the accusing. I survived here by rules I wrote in my head the first week I moved into the staff cottage with Noah's clothes in a laundry basket and my pride in a paper bag. Stay small. Stay useful. Stay invisible. I repeated it while I stripped beds, while I polished silver, while I counted steps to avoid the main stairs. I never lingered near the office wing. I never asked about late-night visitors. I never let Noah wander farther than the kitchen door. And I never forgot that one mistake could cost us everything. Mrs. Alvarez was the only person who treated me like a human instead of a hazard. She ran the kitchen like a calm harbor inside a storm, and that morning she placed coffee within reach and kept her voice gentle on purpose. She didn't question me about the study. She just reminded me, with a look and a squeeze of my shoulder, that fear could not be the only thing feeding my son. My life before this job was a spreadsheet of emergencies. Noah's pneumonia bill was more than $5,000 even after insurance, and every month I tried to build a savings cushion that life kept chewing through. I wanted to go back to school, piece by piece, so I could stop living on tips and overtime and luck. Here the paycheck landed on time, meals were covered, and the heat stayed on. That was why I stayed. Being a single mom meant I carried two schedules in my head at all times: school pickup, field trip slips, daycare backups, emergency contacts. If the school called, I needed to answer, even if my hands were in bleach water. Mrs. Alvarez was listed as Noah's emergency contact because I had no family close enough to matter. That fact made me feel both grateful and exposed. Late that morning, Gabe Rourke found me near the linen closet and let me know Mr. Cross wanted me in his office. My stomach tightened so hard it hurt. In 2 years, no summons had ever come. I washed my hands, checked my uniform, and walked through the mansion with my spine straight because shaky people looked guilty in places like this. I felt every set of eyes as I crossed the corridor, polished floors reflecting my shoes like a spotlight. My mind replayed the missing envelope, the way the room froze. I counted breaths to keep from running, because running would end us. His office felt like a sealed vault. Glass, dark leather, clean lines, and the kind of quiet that made your pulse loud. Mr. Cross stood near the window like he belonged to the skyline. He watched me with that steady, unreadable focus that made it hard to remember to breathe. He didn't threaten me. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reviewed my work as if my life were another file in his hands. He went through the facts. No sick days, no time off, no late arrivals, Hours that belonged to more than one employee. Then he decided I was getting a 20% raise, effective immediately, and he insisted I take a day off. My first instinct was to refuse, because gifts had never been free in my world. Then my mind pictured Noah's worn shoes and the dentist appointment I kept postponing, and I swallowed my pride. After that, the questions shifted. He wasn't asking about floors or schedules. He was trying to understand why I never left the property, why I never had visitors, why my life seemed to shrink into these walls. I held my expression steady and clung to my refrain. Stay small, stay useful, stay invisible. The problem was, he was looking straight at the parts of me I kept hidden. Then he mentioned Noah the way someone mentions weather, like it was obvious information. He knew the school's name, he knew the bus route, he knew which teacher called too often. And without saying it directly, he made it clear security had been told to watch the staff gate at pickup time, that drivers were instructed not to idle too close, that my son's name was on a list of things in this house that were not to be touched. Relief hit me so fast I almost cried. Right behind it came anger, hot and sharp, because no one should have that kind of access to my child, not even in the name of protection. I left his office with my heart racing and my thoughts split down the middle. Part of me wanted to thank him for keeping Noah safe. Part of me wanted to grab my son and run before safety turned into a leash. Back in the hallway, the cameras felt louder again. I repeated my rules like armor, but they sounded thin. If Damian Cross already knew about Noah, what else did he know, and how close was he willing to step? Night in the Cross estate had its own rules. After the kitchens went dark and the last car rolled through the gates, the mansion softened into a hush that made every footstep feel loud. I worked better in that hush, when no one expected me to smile or answer questions. The library was my assignment, 2 stories of shelves and warm lamplight, smelling of paper and cedar polish. I dusted spines, straightened stacks, and tried to pretend I was just a woman doing a job, not a single mom balancing a life on the edge of somebody else's power. Noah was asleep in the cottage, curled around the plush dinosaur Mrs. Alvarez had found at a thrift store, and cleaned like it was treasure. I had packed his lunch for tomorrow, signed the reading log, and set my phone on the counter where I could see it. The school had called earlier, and I still felt the ghost of that vibration in my pocket. Everything I did in this house was really for him. Stay small, stay useful, stay invisible. I repeated it as I climbed the rolling ladder to reach the top shelf, my fingers brushing a row of classics I'd never had time to read before motherhood turned time into a luxury. I was sliding a leather-bound volume back into place when the air changed. It always happened before I heard anything, like the house recognized him and adjusted. The lamps seemed brighter, the silence tighter. I froze for half a second, then forced my hands to keep moving, because pausing would be an admission. Footsteps crossed the threshold, slow and unhurried. I did not turn. I focused on the neat line of books, on the tiny dustcloth in my grip, on my breathing. Why was he here at this hour, in the only room that felt almost human? Damian Cross came to stand close enough that I caught his scent, clean soap layered with that cold, expensive cologne. It should have made me step away. Instead, my body held still, like it was waiting for instructions. I hated that reaction. I hated that my heart beat harder for a man who could ruin me with paperwork, with a phone call, with a quiet decision. I sensed his gaze traveling over me, lingering on the bend of my neck where my hair had come loose, on the small tremor in my wrist as I dusted. I felt him noticing, and I refused to give him the satisfaction of looking back. He asked questions the way he did everything else, without wasted motion. I could feel them in the pauses, in the way he waited for me to fill silence with a confession. He wanted my real life, the one that existed before uniforms and security cameras. He wanted to know why I never talked about family, why my eyes darted to my phone whenever it lit up, why I worked weekends like I was afraid of rest. I answered with careful neutrality, the same way I answered every risk. I had nothing interesting. I was just a worker. My private life did not belong to this house. The truth underneath my words was heavier. I was afraid of being seen because being seen led to being taken. And I had already been taken once by a man who promised he loved me, and then left when the bills came. I was afraid of wanting anything that could be used against me. I was afraid of how my body responded when Damian shifted closer, when his shoulder nearly brushed mine, when his voice dropped into something softer that made my skin prickle. I kept repeating my rules in my head, but the refrain sounded weaker now, like paper in rain. Stay small. Stay useful. Stay invisible. He moved behind me as I reached for another book, and for a moment I felt trapped between the shelf and the weight of him. My pulse thudded in my throat. I imagined Noah's face, imagined explaining to him why we had to move again, why I had lost another job because I forgot who held power. I forced my hand steady and slid the book into place. I made myself breathe. I did not turn. I did not smile. I did not invite anything. Still, the question in his silence sharpened, and I understood he was no longer speaking as a boss checking on staff. He was a man trying to find the soft spot in my armor. I could have answered him, could have offered a small truth and hoped it would satisfy him. I could have told him about the hospital debt, the eviction notice, the nights I cried in the bathroom so Noah would not hear. But any truth would become a thread in his hands, and he was the kind of man who pulled threads until he owned the whole fabric. So I kept my voice flat, my posture professional, my eyes on the shelf. I let my silence be my boundary. I let my fear be my guardrail. In the space between one breath and the next, I felt his frustration, and beneath it something worse, something tender. His footsteps retreated, slow and deliberate, like he was letting me win for now. I stood alone under lamplight, shaking, and knew I'd invent normal just to breathe. I slept, but my mind stayed awake. In the dark of the staff cottage, the library's lamplight kept replaying behind my eyelids, and so did Damian's closeness. I told myself it was nothing, just a boss wandering. Then my pulse proved me wrong every time I remembered his quiet attention. Before sunrise, I packed Noah's lunch, checked his inhaler, and smoothed his hair while he slept. I moved through our tiny kitchen like a thief, stealing normal moments. I hated that my thoughts kept drifting to a man in a mansion instead of my child, as if desire paid rent. Tessa called during my walk to the bus stop, and I let it ring because my voice would have shaken. Her voicemail came right after, full of bright insistence. She reminded me I used to laugh that I was more than uniforms and schedules, and that I deserved one night. I should have ignored her, but the loneliness in me reached for the phone like a reflex. I called back while Noah tied his shoes, and I heard myself agreeing to meet up soon. Then, without planning it, I said I already had plans for Friday. A small lie, effortless. Tessa pressed for details, and panic turned creative. I invented Ben on the spot, a quiet guy I supposedly met in the grocery line, someone who worked for the city parks department and liked old movies. The more I described him, the more I realized I was describing safety itself. When I hung up, my cheeks burned. I had built a whole man just to prove I could. It wasn't for Tessa. It was for me and for Damian, even if he never heard it. I needed evidence that his attention hadn't rewritten my identity or made me forget myself. That evening, I did what I always did: homework. Folder signed, reading timer, set backpack, zipped lunch note tucked inside. I checked the emergency contact sheet on the fridge, Mrs. Alvarez's number written beside mine like a lifeline. Noah asked about tomorrow, and I promised stability with a steady smile. In bed, I told myself the lie would fade, but it didn't. It sat in my chest like a match waiting for friction. I imagined Damian's face in the library, the way his questions hovered. What would he do if he believed another man could claim my time so easily? Early the next morning, the mansion felt too bright, and I walked into the kitchen to start coffee for staff and found Damian there. Alone, sleeves rolled, staring at nothing like he hadn't slept. The sight jolted me. This was his house, yet he looked like a man stranded in it. I set my bag down, hands steady on the counter, and explained I needed to leave on time that evening. My voice sounded normal, which surprised me. He turned slightly, attention sharpening. I added the final detail before courage disappeared, letting the word date fall like a coin into water. His reaction was instant and silent, which made it worse. His shoulders locked. The hand near his mug tightened until ceramic complained. Even the kitchen felt colder. He looked at me like I had brought a knife into peace, and for a breath I saw hurt before his mask returned. And I should have felt ashamed, but a reckless part of me lit up, relieved I wasn't imagining the tension. Then guilt followed, sharp and immediate. Noah was asleep in the cottage, and my paycheck kept us afloat, and I had just tested a powerful man like it was a game. I busied myself with the coffee maker, pretending routine could erase what I'd said. I painted Ben as casual, harmless, watched Damian withdraw into stillness. He didn't argue or forbid. He simply went cold, the kind of cold that meant he was counting. I walked out before my face betrayed me. All day the mansion carried pressure. Security moved tighter around corners. Vince's glance lingered longer than usual. Even Mrs. Alvarez watched me like she could taste trouble. My lie had changed the weather. Oh, I had made myself interesting, and interesting people don't last long in Damian Cross's world at all. By afternoon, I understood the trap I'd built. If I claimed a date, I had to leave and stay gone long enough to sell it. Otherwise, Damian would know I lied. I didn't want to see what that knowledge would do. I pictured Noah's face and promised I'd stay careful. In my closet, I found the dress from Noah's kindergarten ceremony, plain navy, still decent. I laid it on the bed like a dare. Mrs. Alvarez paused at my door, her concern loud without words. I kept packing my purse anyway. I needed proof I could choose my own life. As I finished my shift, I saw Damian in the hallway, Gabe at his shoulder. He didn't look at me, but the air tightened. The house held breath. So did I. Men like him didn't tolerate unknowns. When if my story didn't add up, he would call me to the study. I checked on Noah, watched his breathing until my nerves steadied. Then I stared at the navy dress on my bed. Around 7 in the evening, I would leave by the gate and pretend Ben existed. Lie had a schedule now. Damian would notice. House would hold me to it. I couldn't tell which was worse, Damian not caring or caring too much. Either way, I had crossed a line. I had used jealousy like a match, and now I needed the flame to look real. Tonight, I would leave and pretend Ben existed. Tomorrow's study would demand truth finally. By lunchtime, the estate had turned to ice. Doors that usually stayed cracked were closed. Conversations in the service hallway stopped the second I appeared, then restarted in softer tones once I passed. Even the kitchen felt different, or as if every spoon clink carried farther than it should. I kept my face calm and my hands busy, but inside I was counting risks. I had said the word date, and the house had heard it like a siren. Gabe Rourke did not follow me, but I felt him everywhere. His reflection showed up in glass panels, in polished frames, in the dark screen of the staff tablet. He watched how long I lingered by the staff entrance and whether I checked my phone more than once. I read the way a survivor reads weather. The tighter jaw, the quicker scans, the subtle repositioning of men near doorways. Something had shifted, and it was not only in Damian. For a few dangerous minutes, I felt satisfied. I had wanted proof that I was not invisible, that Damian Cross's attention in the library was real. His stillness in the kitchen had been that proof. And then guilt landed like a weight. I had used jealousy like a tool, and tools can cut the hand that holds them. Noah did not deserve to pay for my need to feel seen. The summons came in the late afternoon, delivered with Gabe's usual calm efficiency. He told me Mr. Cross wanted me in the study, and he did not offer a reason. My mouth went dry anyway. I washed my hands twice, smoothed my uniform, and checked that Noah was still in the cottage with Mrs. Alvarez. Then I walked. The mansion's main corridor felt longer than ever. My shoes tapped softly on marble that mirrored the ceiling lights like cold stars. Cameras sat in corners like silent witnesses. I kept my eyes forward and my shoulders squared, repeating my refrain under my breath. Stay small. Stay useful. Stay invisible. Each step felt like a verdict I had not heard yet. Damian's study smelled of cedar and ink and that sharp, clean cologne. He stood behind his desk, not pacing, not angry in any obvious way, just contained. That was worse. I could sense the question pressing against his control, the kind of question a boss does not ask a staff member unless something else is happening underneath. His gaze went to my hands, then to my face, as if he were measuring how much fear I carried. He wanted to know about the date. I could feel the possessiveness under his calm, like a blade kept under a coat. I reminded myself that my personal life was none of his business, and I let my silence make that point before I spoke. I kept my words polite, careful, and small. He pressed anyway, not with volume but with certainty, as if he expected me to obey the way everyone else did. Anger rose in me, sharp and protective. I was a mother. I was an employee. I was not a prize. I could not afford to become a secret entertained between meetings, or a weakness displayed for enemies, or a story whispered by staff who needed someone smaller to judge. I pictured Noah at school tomorrow, trusting that I would show up. I pictured the rent, the inhaler refills, the future I had promised him. I held those images like a shield and pushed back with steady refusal. Damian's control cracked in small ways I could not ignore. His jaw tightened. His fingers flexed against the desk edge. His eyes held mine too long, then shifted as if he hated what he was revealing. The question became personal, almost raw. I answered with guarded honesty because lying in that room felt like stepping onto a trap door. I let him believe it was a first date. Nothing official, but I added one cruel possibility. It could become serious. The moment the words left me, regret burned my throat. Silence expanded between us, thick with meanings neither of us had spoken. For a heartbeat, I saw something wounded cross his face before he pulled it back behind that disciplined mask. He moved closer, and the space between employer and employee narrowed until my pulse rang in my ears. I sensed him reaching for a line he had never crossed, the place where a man stops pretending he is only the boss. I panicked. I made my voice colder. I reminded him, and myself, that I cleaned his house and raised my son on a schedule he did not own. I left before he could say more. My legs carried me down the corridor on instinct, and only when I reached the staff stairwell did I realize my hands were shaking. I leaned against the wall and breathed through the ache in my chest. Winning had never felt like this. If I mattered to him, I had just proven it the hardest way. And now I had to live with what I started. Around 7 in the evening, I would walk out the gate in my navy dress and pretend Ben existed, because if I stayed home, Damian Cross would know I lied, and I feared what his truth would demand. And in the house, I knew he would be waiting to count the hours I was gone. At around 7 in the evening, I stood in my cottage doorway, navy dress brushing my knees, lipstick borrowed from a life I barely remembered. Noah was inside with Mrs. Alvarez, safe, fed, sleepy. I told myself this was only a performance, but my hands shook anyway for him tonight. The main gate clicked open after Gabe checked the drive with his eyes and not his hands. He watched me like a storm watchman, respectful but alert. I walked past the hedges and the cameras, feeling each lens count my steps, as if Ben might appear beside me at all. I chose a diner near the commuter station because it was bright and ordinary. Families ate pancakes, college kids laughed, and the waitress did not know my name. I ordered chamomile tea and a slice of pie I did not want, then stared out at traffic until my chest loosened. My phone buzzed with Tessa's messages, the kind that used to mean weekend plans and cheap wine. She asked how my date was going. I typed back something vague about him being sweet and the restaurant being nice, then placed the phone face down, nauseated by my own little cruelty. And I watched a mother wipe syrup from her toddler's chin and felt shame spread through me. I had used a fictional man to test a real one, and the only innocent person in the story was asleep back home. If Damian suspected the truth, my paycheck could vanish overnight too. Every time the diner door opened, my body tensed, expecting Damian's silhouette instead of strangers in winter coats. I replayed his face when I said the date might become serious, and I hated myself for that line. It was sharp because it worked, and I never needed sharper in life. After about 2 hours, long enough for a respectable meal, I paid and stepped outside. The night wind smelled like exhaust and lake water. I walked back toward the estate bus stop, rehearsing a believable ending, rehearsing a smile, rehearsing what it meant to keep a lie alive for now. By the time I reached the gates, the grounds were dark except for security lights that painted the paths in pale strips. I expected to slip quietly to my room and breathe again. Instead, I saw the kitchen glow through the side windows, and a familiar figure inside waiting there. Damian sat at the counter with a glass beside him, shoulders tense, shirt collar open like he had been pulling at it. He looked up the moment I entered, and the calm in his eyes felt practiced. He wanted an answer, and the house held its breath along with mine. He asked how it went without raising his voice, and I answered the way I had all day, with careful distance. I described Ben as polite, harmless, forgettable. The lie tasted like metal. Damian's gaze tightened, and his patience thinned into something possessive that frightened me more than any threat. He pressed for details I should never have offered, as if each one could be measured against his own claim on me. I tried to keep my face steady, but my body betrayed me, backing toward the counter. His control was a thin line, and I felt it vibrating hard. The cruelty of it finally broke me. I admitted there had been no dinner, no Ben, no borrowed normal life. I told him I invented it because I needed proof I mattered, because I could not stand the uncertainty in his eyes. My throat burned with shame as I confessed. For a long moment, he did nothing, and I expected anger to fall like a door slamming shut. Instead, his shoulders loosened, and something like relief crossed his face. He made me understand, without soft promises, that I had mattered from the start, that he had been fighting it too. He moved closer slowly, giving me space to step away. I did not. The first touch was gentle, more question than command, and my fear answered with courage. When his mouth met mine, it felt like 2 years of restraint collapsing at once, like breath returning after holding it long. When we separated, I kept my forehead near his, eyes closed, because looking at him felt like falling. I knew the moment would cost me something. He did not demand more. He only held my face as if I were fragile and precious, and that tenderness unsettled me all over. I reminded him in a rush of thoughts that I could not lose this job, that Noah needed stability more than romance. He answered with certainty that my position was safe, that whatever happened between us would not touch my paycheck. The promise eased my panic, but not my doubt. We did not turn it into a fantasy. The house still had staff, cameras, and rules, and I still had a child asleep nearby. After one more quiet touch, Damian let me go. I walked back across the halls alone, the kiss burning like a secret I could not hide. In my room, I sat on the bed fully dressed, listening to the quiet outside my window. My lips still tingled, and my heart still raced. I thought about Noah's face in the morning and how I would explain nothing while everything had changed. Consequences always arrived with daylight first. I knew I could not drift into this. I could not be hidden, or bought, or kept for his worst nights. If we continued, it had to be on my terms, with my independence intact and my son protected. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, rehearsing my boundaries. I woke before the alarm, alone in my narrow bed. Awe and the memory of Damian's mouth still sat on my skin like a bruise that didn't hurt until I touched it. For a few seconds I forgot where I was. Then the cottage ceiling came into focus and my stomach tightened. I had work in an hour. Noah had school. My paycheck had a due date. Kisses didn't pay for inhalers. They didn't explain why a man with gates and guards had looked at me like I was something he wanted to keep. I dressed fast, pinning my hair so it couldn't betray me, and padded to Noah's room. He slept sprawled across the sheets, one small hand curled around his dinosaur. Mrs. Alvarez had left him there last night so I could follow my lie to its end. The guilt of that favor pressed on my ribs. I checked his breathing, the way I always did, and then lined up his socks and hoodie for the day like I could organize the chaos back into order. In the staff kitchen, Mrs. Alvarez moved quietly, sliding a mug of coffee toward me without comment. Her eyes did the talking. They lingered on my mouth for half a second, then on my shaking hands, then on the wedding band she wore like proof that love could survive hard lives. She didn't scold me. She simply adjusted Noah's lunchbox on the counter and left an extra juice pouch beside it, as if reminding me what mattered and what could be lost. By the time Noah shuffled in, hair wild and eyes sleepy, I had made a decision. Whatever last night was, it could not drift. I could not become a rumor in a mansion or a weakness in a man's war. If Damian wanted me in his life, he would get all of me, including my boundaries. I walked Noah to the main house door, watched him climb into the car that took him to school, and felt my courage settle into place. Around 9 in the morning, Gabe told me Damian was in the study and expected me. No threat, no explanation, just a fact that made my palms sweat. I crossed the marble hallways with my spine straight, rehearsing my words the way I used to rehearse questions for hospital billing offices. The study door was open. Damian stood by the window, shoulders rigid, as if sleep had been a luxury he couldn't afford. He turned when I entered, and the silence between us felt loaded. I did not let him start. I told him calmly that my life did not belong to his impulse, and neither did my child's. If we were going to do this, it had rules. I would not be hidden, and not in back rooms or behind closed doors while he returned to the world like nothing had changed. I would keep my job, my paycheck, my routine, because independence was the only reason I could look my son in the eye and promise him stability. And I would never be treated like property, not a prize to claim, not a thing to guard, not a weakness to lock away. I told him Noah was off limits from every shadow in his business. No using my son as a reason to summon me, no security men speaking to him, no gifts that came with invisible strings. If danger ever reached toward Noah because of Damian, then Damian would be the one to move heaven to stop it, and I would be the one to decide whether we stayed. I also told him I needed the freedom to walk away if this turned toxic, without intimidation, without money waved in my face, all without fear that he would crush my life for leaving. Damian listened the way he listened to everything, still and intense, as if my words were a threat he respected. He nodded once, slow, and I felt the room loosen a fraction. He made it clear he would not touch my income or my role, that my work would remain mine, not a costume to keep me close. Then he admitted, in that controlled way, that he had already put barriers around Noah. The school calls were routed through Mrs. Alvarez for privacy. Drivers had orders to park out of sight. Security had been warned that Noah was not a topic for jokes or questions. He had done it quietly, without asking me, because he could. When I returned to the cottage after that meeting, Noah was sitting on the floor with his dinosaur. The torn seam on its tail, the one I had meant to fix for weeks, was neatly stitched with green thread that matched the fabric. Beside him sat a new box of crayons and a pack of tissues, the brand his teacher requested, things I had not had time to buy. Mrs. Alvarez's eyes slid away when she saw me notice. Damian's protection had hands, and it had already entered my son's world. I told myself we would try, carefully, with my feet planted in my own life. Hope warmed me, then chilled when I heard Vince's voice on the phone in the hallway, tense and clipped, repeating the Marchetti name. Gabe's footsteps quickened toward the office wing. Damian's world was moving again, and I could already feel it reaching for us next. That morning the estate tried to pretend it was a normal house. I drank coffee at the staff counter while Noah's backpack sat by the door, zipped and ready, on his repaired dinosaur tucked into the side pocket like a secret comfort. Mrs. Alvarez hovered nearby, reading me without questions. For 10 minutes the mansion was just warm toast and a sleepy kid asking for syrup. Noah left for school with a driver who never spoke to him, only opened the door and checked the street twice. I watched the car disappear and told myself this was what my boundaries were for, to keep the world from spilling into my child's life. I went back inside, hung my uniform apron, and started folding linens, letting repetition calm the chaos in my head. Then Vince Calder appeared in the service hallway with that look that meant the day was already lost. His shoulders were tight, his phone was in his hand, and his gaze cut past me. I didn't need details to feel the weight of it. The Marchettis were moving again, in testing territory, testing pride, testing how much Damian Cross would tolerate before the city remembered why people feared his name. I saw Damian only for a moment when Vince stepped into the office wing. He had been the man who listened to my terms with control and something like respect. Now his face flattened into pure focus, and his body turned to stone. The softness I had glimpsed vanished as if it had never existed. He didn't shout or slam doors. He simply became quiet in a way that made the whole house hold still. Security shifted positions. Radios crackled once, then went silent. Even the light in the corridor felt colder. I kept working, but my hands moved wrong. A pillowcase slipped from my grip. My mind filled the gaps with ugly guesses. In this world, territory wasn't just land. It was roots, money, loyalty, and then the threat of what happened when someone crossed a line. I didn't want to know what Damian would do. I also couldn't pretend I didn't care, because if he went to war, Noah and I were standing too close to the battlefield. Gabe found me near the pantry before lunch, his posture careful, his voice low enough that the cameras wouldn't capture it. He wasn't threatening me. He was warning me the way you warn someone about thin ice. Loving Damian made me leverage. As a mother, that meant my child was leveraged too. If enemies couldn't reach him directly, they would reach for the softest part of him, and they would not feel guilty about it. Anger flashed through me so hot it made my eyes sting. Noah was 6. He still believed adults kept promises. He still ran to me with scraped knees expecting comfort, not strategy. The idea of men with guns and grudges even learning his name made my stomach twist. At the same time, fear turned practical. I started checking exits without thinking. I scanned windows. I planned routes from the kitchen to the cottage to the car line at school. I hated myself for adapting so fast, and I hated Damian's world for demanding it. That afternoon I picked Noah up and held his hand tighter than usual. He chattered about a spelling test and a class pet, and I answered with a smile that felt stapled on. Back at the cottage I kept him inside, made homework a game, and listened for every unfamiliar sound outside. I told myself I was being dramatic. Then I remembered the missing envelope, the cameras, the way security could change the air with one glance, and I knew I wasn't imagining anything. Late that night, long after Noah fell asleep, I heard a car return through the gates. I didn't look out the window. Curiosity was a dangerous habit here. Still, when I walked to the kitchen for water, I saw one of the guards at the counter, wrapping his knuckles with tape. A dark smear marked his cuff, not enough to explain, just enough to confirm. He avoided my eyes. I avoided his hands. My throat tightened around questions I refused to ask. Damian came in minutes later, moving like a man carrying weight he couldn't put down. He looked at me as if checking for injuries, as if my body could tell him whether the world had touched me while he was gone. I kept my face calm and my voice steady in my head, reminding myself that panic helped no one. I didn't ask what happened. I didn't need the details to feel the cost. By the time I returned to my room, a sleep would not come. My terms had been brave, but bravery didn't stop bullets or kidnappers or the kind of revenge people whispered about. I lay there listening to the estate breathe and wondered a question I hated. If they can't reach him, will they reach for my son? Before sunrise, Gabe knocked on the cottage door with a bag already in his hand. He didn't need to explain much. The decision had been made. For now, Noah and I were going somewhere safe, somewhere quiet, somewhere Damian could control from a distance. Safety should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like a cage being built around us, one lock at a time. Before sunrise, the decision was already packed into the air. Gabe stood on my porch with a duffel, and I knew Noah and I were being moved because the Marchettis were pushing Damian to the edge. Relief came first, sharp and guilty, because my son would be farther from danger. Then anger followed, because my life was being rerouted by men I had never met. The last feeling was the hardest, resentment that protection could look like ownership. I kissed Noah's forehead, smiled like it was an adventure, and swallowed my fear as the gates opened and the car waited. An hour later, we rolled out in a black SUV, Vince in the front seat, 2 more men behind us like silent brackets. Noah pressed his face to the tinted window, watching the mansion shrink until it looked like a postcard of someone else's life. I watched the rearview mirror instead, tracking every vehicle that stayed too close. The city faded into highway gray, and I felt the leash tighten with every mile. Vince didn't explain much, but his posture did. Shoulders squared, phone in hand, jaw set. Our protection and surveillance rode together, even when the road looked calm outside. The safe house sat 2 hours north, tucked behind pines and stone walls, with a lake glinting beyond the trees. It was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful. Polished, quiet, and designed to impress. A keypad guarded the gate. Cameras watched the driveway. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint and unopened cabinets. Noah ran from room to room, delighted by the space, while I measured exits and counted locks. I told myself this was peace, but peace didn't come with armed men on the porch or instructions about where I could walk without asking or leaving footprints. I unpacked Noah's favorite hoodie first, the soft one with the worn elbows, because routine was the only weapon I had. I set out snacks, cued cartoons, and then made him brush his teeth at the usual time, as if habit could cancel danger. He asked why we were here, and I answered with a cheerful explanation that dodged the truth. After he fell asleep, I sat beside his bed and listened to the house settle. The silence was heavier than the mansion's, because it carried distance. I could not see Damian or read his face, imagine what he was doing. The first day dragged. Vince stayed near the windows, speaking in low tones to people I couldn't see, while I paced between kitchen and living room. I checked my phone until the screen felt hot. No updates, only brief orders to stay put. Questions circled anyway. How long would this last? What did Damian do when men challenged him? Would the Marchettis stop at threats? Or reach for a child? Noah sensed my tension and grew quiet, which scared me more than tears. That night, I told him a bedtime story, steady voice, trembling hands until sleep claimed him safely. Late the next afternoon, my phone flashed Damian's name, and I felt my ribs lock. His voice sounded rough, like sleep had been optional. He checked on Noah first, and my anger softened into gratitude. Then he warned me he was doing things I might not forgive, the kind that kept us safe. I refused details, because some pictures never leave. I told him I understood the moral weight, and that I chose trust anyway. Not blind, not naive, just steady. When he hung up, I stared at the screen and wondered what his mercy looked like tonight for us. He arrived the following day, not at sunrise, not at night, just at a quiet hour when the lake looked flat as glass. Vince stepped outside first, scanning the road, and then waved him in. Damian looked unharmed, but exhaustion hollowed his face. When he held Noah, his hands were careful, as if he feared breaking innocence. When he held me, his grip turned fierce, then softened. I saw darkness in his eyes, something heavy he would not name, and I understood safety had been purchased with choices I didn't want to imagine. I did not ask. I just stayed close. That evening, after Noah slept, Damian and Vince spoke in another room, and I heard urgency through the wall. This was our new stage. Not stolen kisses and brave terms, but plans, routes, consequences. Fear stayed, but a hard resolve rose beside it. I could not undo who Damian was, and I would not pretend I was untouched. Loving him meant learning how threats moved and where they entered. It meant accepting that my life could become a message to his enemies. I held that truth like a stone and promised myself I would not drop it, no matter what. Back at the estate, I noticed details I had ignored. A staff member lingering near the office wing, a delivery log twice, a new face asking about schedules. The safe house taught me danger could travel on quiet feet. The Marchettis were outside, but the bigger risk might be closer, hidden in routine. Mrs. Alvarez met us at the service door, expression tight, eyes flicking past Noah as if checking shadows behind him. I realized she was watching someone. If threats could reach us through gates and highways, they could also slip in wearing a staff uniform, smiling, collecting facts. Home did not feel like home when we returned. The gates opened slower, the cameras tracked longer. Ina and Gabe's men checked the trunk twice before we could pass. Noah swung my hand like nothing had changed, asking for cereal and cartoons, but I watched every corner. The estate looked polished, yet the air tasted tense, like metal before lightning. Staff kept their heads down. Even Mrs. Alvarez spoke with her eyes more than her mouth. I told myself the safe house taught me to notice, and now noticing was my job. I felt rules tighten around me, and welcomed them. For days I listened to background noise. A maid lingered near the office corridor longer than cleaning required. A delivery clipboard moved between hands too often. Someone asked security about shift changes as if it was casual. I began to recognize footsteps, the squeak of certain shoes, the timing of lunch breaks. Noah's schedule became sacred, and I walked him to the cottage bus pickup and watched the driveway until the car vanished. Mrs. Alvarez adjusted her apron whenever a new girl passed, and that small gesture became my warning bell. Her eyes followed Haley, the new maid, with tight patience. Haley did not look like the rest of us. Her uniform fit perfectly, her hair stayed smooth through steam and sweat, and her smile appeared on cue. She cleaned well, too well, as if she practiced for inspection. But her questions hovered. She circled the calendar board, glancing at visitor slots and delivery windows. She offered to help with inventory, then asked where supplies were stored and who had keys. Once, I caught her watching Noah from the doorway, not warmly, but like she was memorizing a detail. Mrs. Alvarez stiffened whenever Haley entered as if knives had arrived quietly, and I did not accuse her outright. I spoke to Vince in the laundry room where the machines covered sound, framing it as a mother's instinct, not gossip. I explained the pattern, the schedule glances, the key questions, the way she tracked security routes with her eyes. I told him I was not trying to earn favor or play hero. I wanted Noah to grow up believing doors were just doors, not threats. Vince listened without reacting, which made me more afraid. He simply nodded once and left, carrying my worries like a file. By supper, Gabe kept Haley in sight. The confirmation came fast, which meant the house had been compromised longer than I wanted to admit. Vince returned before midnight with a face stripped of humor. He did not speak much, but his silence said enough. Haley was not a curious hire. Her background was a cover, her references a chain of clean lies. She worked for the federal task force, planted to watch Damian's movements, record names, and map his operations. My skin went cold. It was not only rivals at the gate, it was a listening device wearing our uniform. I looked at Noah's door and trembled. Damian's first instinct was control, and I could feel it ripple through security like electricity. He wanted to remove Haley, erase the problem, make an example that would warn the next person. Part of me understood the impulse. Another part remembered my terms, and Noah's face, and the fact that power could ruin us both. I asked Damian to slow down, to think. If Haley disappeared abruptly, the feds would know they were discovered and tighten their net. We needed a plan that survived daylight and paperwork. I needed him to choose strategy, not rage, because my child slept nearby. The case they were building depended on proving an ongoing criminal enterprise. That phrase kept looping in my mind like a warning label. If the present changed, their story weakened. Damian already had legitimate fronts, investments, contracts that lived in daylight. I pushed him to accelerate what he had only considered, shutting down the worst operations, moving money clean, documenting every step, offering his people legal work instead of shadows. Let Haley report the truth of that shift. If she told her bosses he was going legitimate, and it was real, their leverage shrank. Noah deserved a life without whispers. Damian studied me like he was measuring whether I understood the price. I did. Going legitimate would anger men who thrived on fear. It would invite rivals to test him during transition. It would make his own crew question loyalty. But the alternative was a case tightening around him while Noah grew up inside a target. I told Damian I was done being prey, done building my days around what other people might do. I wanted a future where my son could say his last name at school without consequence. Strategy was not weakness. It was survival. For us both. By the next morning, Haley still worked the halls, smiling, collecting details, unaware that we had chosen a different battlefield. Security tightened, but quietly. Damian met with lawyers and accountants, not only enforcers. Vince began drafting lists of operations that could be closed first. I started keeping notes on staff patterns, because if one spy got in, others could too. Noah noticed the tension and held my hand harder, and I promised him this would end. And the war would not be won by blood. It would be won by building, in full view. And eyes would learn who we became. The house felt watched from every corner after we chose our plan. Haley still pushed her cart down the hallways, smiling, taking mental notes. And I learned to hear the quiet click of her phone case against her pocket like a metronome. I packed Noah's lunch, signed his homework sheet, and kept my shoulders loose even when my skin crawled. Damian moved through meetings with lawyers and accountants while security shadowed every doorway. At night, I lay awake listening to cars at the gate, wondering which detail would end us. Fear lived in the wallpaper, but so did resolve, and I refused to shrink again. The next weeks blurred into lists and signatures. Damian shut down cash businesses that could not survive daylight and replaced them with contracts that did. Trucks changed routes. Warehouses were audited. Men who once lived on shortcuts were offered training, legal paychecks, or severance, and the ones who laughed at paperwork found it harder to laugh when their families depended on it. I drove Noah to school, worked my shift, then sat at the kitchen table helping Damian translate threats into negotiations. Every change was documented, boxed, and filed, because truth needed receipts. Haley watched it all, and I imagined every note she sent upstream. Not everyone accepted the new rules. A crew leader slammed his fist on Damian's desk and called the shift weakness, and I felt my heart stop because I thought blood would answer. Damian answered with stillness instead. He reminded them that prison does not care about pride, and that a legitimate empire can feed more mouths than fear ever did. Some men quit. Some stayed and tested him with sullen silence. Vince watched me like I was the reason for this turn, and I carried that blame without apologizing, because Noah's safety was my only argument. I kept my chin up, even when hands shook. My role was quieter but constant. I started keeping a notebook of what triggered conflict, who escalated first, and which concessions saved face without surrendering ground. I learned Damian preferred options, not ultimatums, and I practiced offering him 3 paths instead of 1 demand. When a partner threatened to walk, I suggested a slower transition, shared profits, and written protections, and Damian listened. He did not become gentle overnight, but he stopped defaulting to intimidation. At home, I helped Noah spell new words, and I wondered if Damian was learning new words too. Some nights we worked until 2 in the morning, fueled by coffee. Then the pressure spiked. Reporters appeared outside the gate, and someone leaked a photo of Damian entering a courthouse. Staff whispered again, louder this time, and Noah asked why strangers stood near the driveway. I told him they were lost, but my voice cracked. Haley walked past with her perfect calm, and I pictured her feeding the story to her handlers. That night I sat on the bathroom floor, shaking, convinced we were too late. Damian came home silent, knuckles tight, and the house felt like it was waiting for the next shoe to drop. I pressed palm to my throat and prayed Noah slept. The next day our lawyer sent word that the case was wobbling. Their strongest claim needed current crimes, not rumors, and every audit and contract we produced made that claim harder. Damian's legitimate companies started announcing new hires and new safety standards, and the paperwork trail grew too thick to ignore. Haley kept working, but her questions shifted, more confused now because the story she came for was changing under her feet. I still feared a trap, yet I felt the first thin thread of relief pull through my chest. When agents returned to the gate, they stayed minutes, not hours, and Gabe's shoulders lowered. Soon, the pressure eased in ways you could measure. The task force stopped calling certain vendors. The reporters vanished. Haley was reassigned without ceremony, her locker empty by the next shift, and no one in the staff spoke her name. Damian did not celebrate loudly. He met with his attorneys, signed another stack of documents, and came home looking older but lighter. The investigation had not crowned him innocent. It had lost its grip because the present no longer matched the accusation. We survived by changing what could be proven. That night Noah laughed, and I realized I had not scanned windows in hours once. The estate grew quieter in a different way. Gabe joked with Mrs. Alvarez at the coffee station, and Vince stopped looking at me like an equation he resented. Damian still carried shadows, but he carried them with intention now, choosing meetings in daylight and refusing the shortcuts that used to define him. Noah started bringing friends to the cottage yard after school, and I let myself sit on the steps and watch instead of pacing. The mansion was still guarded, still powerful, yet it felt less like a trap. It felt like a place where choices could be made on purpose, even when fear returned. One afternoon, Damian handed me a folder, not with gifts, but with options. Inside were enrollment forms for the community college program I once circled online at midnight, plus a plan to cover tuition and adjust my schedule without taking my independence. He cleared a small office nook near the library, stocked with notebooks and a laptop, and he promised my work would remain mine, not a leash. I cried in the supply closet afterward, embarrassed by hope. Noah found me later and asked if I was happy, and I finally said yes without flinching. I kept my boundaries, and love met me there instead. Looking back, I know love did not clean Damian's past, and it did not erase my fear. What it did was push us into truth. He stopped pretending power had to be cruel, and I stopped pretending I could survive by shrinking. We chose building over breaking, paperwork over panic, daylight over whispers, because Noah deserved a future that was ordinary. If you made it to the end of our story, tell me what you believe. Can people change, and what boundaries matter most? Like, share, and comment so I can hear you. Your voice helps me keep writing and helps someone else choose better.